This podcast is rated S for spoilers. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Half Past Podcast. This is episode 88, the movie review of Dr. Sleep. I'm Graham Ricks, and here with me is my friend and co-pilot, Ian Jones.
Struggling with the time change co-pilot, Ian Jones.
Right?
Because this is the second time in a row you called me, and I'm like, why the hell is he calling me at 8 a.m.? Oh, that's right. We suck, and we fell back.
Yep. It's so funny because you as an Arizona native, you're pretty much your entire life, you just never had to really deal with it when you're in Tucson or in the Phoenix area. It just doesn't, nobody does. They just voted to not have daylight savings time.
We're
whatsoever.
just going to do our own thing. It is so stupid that climate change. Coming from a state my entire life where that's never been the case, I can tell you now, as an adult living in a state where they do observe daylight savings time, that it is the dumbest idea.
It's so funny, man, because I ended up spending so much time, and I've noticed it too, because the problem is when I'm at work, since we have so many offices we talk to across the country, every time a time change happens, everyone just kind of forgets that the main location doesn't have daylight savings time. So meetings get all messed up, and it happens every single time. They're just like, oh, wait, are we still meeting at this time? Well, yes, our time hasn't changed. We're the main thing. You guys need to figure it out.
You guys need to change to us, but that's just never the case. Like, where I work, there's... I'm working remotely from Washington, and and the main office is in Arizona, but then they also have an office in Dallas.
Yep.
And so, boy, I'll tell you, when Dallas needs a meeting, that's when it gets real fun, because it's like, what is it? Is it 2 or 3 hours difference? This is such a stupid problem to have.
It is a really interesting problem, and I never had a problem with it whatsoever. Like, I grew up in Oklahoma, so we did the Central Time, so I would change every time, and I always remembered what it was, because it was always the spring forward, fall backward thing was the way you remembered which way you did your clock. And I moved out here, and then realized, oh my gosh, this is not having to worry about this at all is great. The only thing that's weird is you notice the difference, because during the winter, it's when I go into work, it's pitch black. It's pitch black when I go into work, and if it's the other time of the year, it's just bright and sunny. It's the weirdest thing. So I definitely noticed the time change, even because I go to work at the same time every day, but we don't change our clock. So I noticed the difference in light every single time, and I'm like, man, why is it so freaking dark? And I remember back when I was working a lot of overtime when I first started working there, and we were understaffed. I worked a crap load of overtime, and I remember there was definitely time periods around this time period where you'd go to work and I would leave and I would never see daylight. Not at all. I would get at work at night and I would leave at night. It was the worst thing.
That's why in New York and pretty much everywhere in every country now, you can't build buildings. And I forget the name of the building. You know which ones I'm talking about in New York, but you have to now layer buildings so that sunlight actually gets to people, because so many people in the early 20s and 30s were just jumping to their deaths because they never saw sunlight. It's a real thing.
It definitely weighs on you, man. I definitely remember working those hours, and I'm like, man, I just never see daylight while I'm at work.
Yeah.
It's really weird.
Psychologically,
especially since they had us all. Yeah, there is, and it makes it even worse because at the time they had us in this like closet with no windows.
Oh,
It's
jeez.
just like this little tiny room that had like 5 or 6 people in it. It's much different now. Oh, like there's like they have giant windows and everything. It's like we've been building so much, so it's been great. But I definitely remember at first I was just like, wow, I just never see any sun whatsoever. It definitely weighs on you. Now that we've got completely off track, so Doctor Sleep.
So speaking of Doctor Sleep, um,
Yeah.
I thought my lovely new wife might kill me because I lost my wedding ring for like two
Oh
days.
my
So
gosh.
the thing is, the thing about that is,
Mmm.
I had we initially bought two wedding rings that were silicone ones, and I actually liked
Yeah.
that one a lot because I was really worried about maybe getting my finger caught or something
Yeah.
like that. My wife had, and this was when we were engaged. She showed me a clip from Jimmy Fallon where he was talking about how he almost lost his finger, and
Jeez.
they had to reattach it. So
Ugh.
after hearing that story, I was like, well, maybe I want a different kind of wedding ring. But then, so we ordered silicone ones, and then as the wedding was approaching, we decided to do Star Wars themed
Yep.
ones. So I had the metallic. I've got the Kylo Ren ring,
Yeah.
which is so appropriate for me. But I freaking lost it, and part of the reason why I think I lost it is because I've been dropping some weight. I'm not exactly the
Yeah.
same ring size, and the ring has just
Yep.
been falling off my hand.
Yep.
But
That
at
happens.
the same token, I tore this place apart for 2 days, and I was really depressed about it. Couldn't find it, and the weird thing was, like, I knew we had scouts with Cameron.
Yeah.
We've got scouts on Wednesday, so I was like, okay, I don't know what we're going to be doing at scouts, but I need to swap out rings. So I definitely was wearing the silicone one, but
Yeah.
I don't remember taking the metallic one off that day, which is really weird. And I
Yeah,
was
that's
just
strange.
racking my brain, and then I started thinking about, like, well, what if it fell off? Because that's what's been happening.
Yeah.
Like, if I don't keep if I'm not careful, that ring just falls
Yeah.
falls off.
Oh yeah.
And somewhat ironically, I start thinking about how it could have fallen off. And I remember that. Now, I wasn't supposed to do this because I'm supposed to be on a diet, but I got into the kids' Halloween candy, which was out in the garage, and I was like, wait a minute. I definitely stuck my hand in there to get a Snickers bar. So I pull the first bag out, and immediately when I pick up the bag, I hear a metallic sound. It's a heavy bag. There's a lot of candy in it. But I hear a metallic sound, and I'm like, oh, this is it. It's in here. So I dump it all out, and sure enough,
Oh man.
there's my ring. But, I mean, if you think about it, like, had we pitched all that candy, it would have been gone, and I never would have known
Oh
where it
man,
was.
that is so crazy,
It
man.
is really crazy.
I love how the universe has punished you for being off
Yes,
your diet.
I know.
Like-
There's that, right?
Oh
Literally caught
man.
red-handed.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, that's all the motivation I need.
Yep. Yep. I cannot
Moving
believe that,
forward.
man. Oh, that's crazy. I love it. It's so funny, man. I know you've been dropping some pounds. You look good at the wedding, man. I was just like, man, he's been dropping some weight there. So it makes sense, man. And I love it.
We're gonna get a little. There's actually these handy little stoppers because we don't want to resize any of the rings, but
Yeah.
there's these handy clear stoppers that Annie's been using on her engagement ring because sometimes she needs them. But it works. It does the trick, and you don't really notice them.
Oh,
So
okay,
we
that's
found
cool.
one that's gonna fit that ring, and hopefully that it just stays on. But you know,
Oh, that's good.
For someone who's never ever worn jewelry before,
yeah,
that was pretty tough. That was definitely pretty tough, not knowing where it was. And
oh, I bet. Like, jeez, you haven't even had to wear it that long.
I know.
Almost lost it immediately. Oh man!
I swear
That's
I don't
hilarious.
mean anything by it.
That's so funny because like I've been dropping pounds too, and I've been like changing fingers on my ring because I have a ring, but I'm not married, so I can move this around.
Well, you're
I
not
can
married
move my
yet.
ring around wherever I want. So I've just been changing it to like larger fingers. So like for the longest I had it on like my right ring finger, and then I had to change it to like my left middle finger, and then it got too small for that, so now it's on my right middle finger because my right hand's bigger than my left, clearly. I guess, I don't know. But so now it stays, it fits. But man, eventually I'm gonna have to get it resized or something.
Well, okay, what you can do is get this thing,
get stoppers.
and I'll send you a photo of it.
Yeah, send me that thing because I'm like, ooh, I've been concerned about what I'm gonna do because I'm still dropping pounds and I'm concerned.
You're looking good though.
Yeah, man, it's been great. It's been really good. Oh man, this intro has been long enough that we're not going to talk about anything else. We're not going to talk about anything else. I'm putting a stop to it right now.
Okay.
And we're going to take a break. And then we're going to actually talk about Dr. Sleep.
Sounds good to me.
All right, man. Alright, Joes, we're back from our break here, and we're going to get started on Dr. Sleep. So, Dr. Sleep, I'm not going to read a crazy synopsis on it. It is the sequel to The Shining.
There you go.
That's all you really need to know.
That's all you need to know.
That's all you need to know. It's the sequel to The Shining.
Let's just go home now. No? Okay. All right.
I was reading about, because I was unaware that there was a sequel to The Shining, and then I realized that it's because Stephen King wrote the book like years later, like decades later. Like, I guess he wrote it in like 2013 or something like that. So, like, I wasn't even aware that he had a sequel to this, but clearly he does. This movie is directed by Mike Flanagan, who also did Absentia, Oculus, Gerald's Game, The Haunting of Hill House, the Netflix series.
Ah, okay. We are going to talk about that later.
Okay, awesome.
Let's not say anything else about that.
Okay, that's fine. And then he also did Hush, which I believe I've mentioned on the podcast before. It's another movie that showed up on Netflix. I don't think it was a Netflix movie, but it did show up on Netflix at one point in time. And the whole point of Hush is the main character is deaf, yet it's a horror movie.
Yes.
And so it's done in a really creative way where, like, the way that she has to deal with this, like, intruder that's trying to kill her and she can't hear. It's like a really neat movie if anybody wants to watch it. I'm not sure where it's at now, but Hush is a really good movie. It's starring Ewan McGregor as Dan Torrance. Everyone knows who Ewan McGregor is. Star Wars, Trainspotting, and he was also in that Christopher Robin movie, which apparently wasn't great, but I don't remember watching it, so,
The what movie?
Idea.
Sorry, you cut out
Christopher Robin.
Oh, right.
The one that was...
he's Obi-Wan or he's nothing, as far as I'm concerned.
That is perfectly fine. He's always great as Obi-Wan. Rebecca Ferguson as Rose the Hat, who... I don't know. I really like Rebecca Ferguson.
She is wonderful.
Oh,
what a
great.
Talented actress.
Oh, yeah. She's so good. So, did Mission Impossible, and that was the first real movie I saw her in.
Yeah.
And she's just really good in it. And she's also in The Greatest Showman. And she's good in that, too. She's not in it a lot, but she like, definitely when she's on screen, she's there, which is really important for an actor. And she is going to show up in the new Dune remake, like that movie. So I'm all of a sudden I'm more interested in Dune because everyone knows who's listening to this podcast that Dune is rough. It's a rough watch. It's really slow, and it absolutely feels like it's the longest movie ever when you watch it. It's really rough, man. It's not a bad movie, but man, it's slow. And I've been really curious about this new Dune remake, and I didn't know that she was in it. And then I started seeing the rest of the cast, and I'm like, man, it's got an ensemble cast. Like Oscar Isaac shows up in there too.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, okay, all right, maybe I'll actually enjoy this movie.
I don't know. I thought that about Blade Runner, the second Blade Runner.
Yeah.
But
we'll have to see what
whatever.
happens.
I was like, oh wow, this cast.
Yeah, right. Kyliegh Curran as Abra Stone, who she's really young, so she's only done one other movie, and it's called I Can, I Will, I Did, and it is by far, I read the premise of it, and it sounds like one of the saddest movies I've ever read. It's like, my gosh, it's like the premise of that movie is like a kid that's bullied ends up getting into a car accident and has to live his life in a wheelchair afterwards. And I was just like, what movie is this? And I was just like, holy crap. So I don't know. She's not the main character in that one, but that was her only other movie. Cliff Curtis is Billy Freeman, who I've seen in so many things. This guy shows up all the time, and he's just another one of those actors where you recognize him, but you never know what the hell he's been in. But he's been in Blow, Live Free or Die Hard, The Dark Horse, and Body of Proof.
And wasn't he a villain for one of the 24 seasons?
Ooh, yes. Yes, he was.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you're right on the money. He's definitely one of those just really hardworking actors that.
Yep. He puts in a lot of time. Yep. He doesn't have a big name, but he puts in a lot of time. He does a lot of acting, and it's pretty good. Zahn McClarnon as Crow Daddy, he was in Longmire, Fargo, and in Westworld. And this guy has been around for a while, and he's been doing he's kind of the same type of actor. I don't think his face is as recognizable as Cliff Curtis, at least for me. But I know that I've seen him a lot in stuff. And so he's been around for a while. Those are the only ones I'm going to get into at the moment, because those are kind of the only ones that really matter in this movie. So I am ready to get into the quirks and likes, man. You ready?
I am ready. Let's do it.
Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is Dan clearly has had a rough time. He's now an alcoholic, and I get that this is a part of his character. The problem I have with his alcoholism is it's in it enough to kind of show you his character, but I'm not sure how it's important in terms of the story. Did you get that feeling when you're watching this movie?
I think it was important in that the scene where he finally has to face it, even though we don't know what he ultimately does, because that mother and that poor baby are never found. They're just dead. They've she ODs, and so I think it's important for him to have that, to turn that page, and I think it's important for it to be there to show a main character who is both struggling with it and having some success, because his transformation into Dr. Sleep, it's important for him to grow as a character. I think, anyway. We see him grow very early on.
Yes,
but then kind of the interesting thing is when he has this psychic connection with a little girl, and he wants her to hide. He doesn't want to push the connection. He doesn't ever want to meet her. In fact, she has to come and find him. which I thought was the interesting thing. He was very
Yeah.
content in staying in the shadows and not ever being found by, ghosts, so much so that he didn't even know that there were, like these vampires out there
Oh yeah. Yeah.
that
He
had
was.
very similar gifts, because
Yes.
he had closed himself off from that world, and he was just using his abilities in small doses.
Yeah.
So I mean, I wouldn't. I think it was important for him to show that he actually cares about people, because there are some devastating scenes early on.
Yeah. And for me, when I was watching it, the problem I had with it is I thought it was good in terms of character growth early on, and I understand when you have it basically shows how rock bottom he is. Like he kind of leaves the woman there with the kid. They die, um, and it's really kind of on him. And he like steals from her, you know. And so like you can see where, and then he ends up sleeping underneath a bridge. Like he's at his lowest point, basically, at this point in time. Um, so I get that, and I see the progression he has later on because he finally just tries to run away, and then he goes to the town, and after he goes to the town, he actually joins a meeting and like meets up with Billy and joins the Alcoholics Anonymous, and like he really cleans, and you get that nice 8 year thing up. Uh, my problem is for me, I didn't really see the growth. For me is there, like he's overcome it and he's finished it, but it definitely still keeps occurring throughout the rest of the time. And I get he's when you're a recovering alcoholic, you are constantly a recovering alcoholic.
Yes,
Like
right.
it's a constant struggle. So like I understand that in it, but then you start getting more involved to this like weird addition of like this, well, let's add in this little bits of alcohol throughout the whole movie. And I'm just kind of like, I didn't really get much closure in that. And my assumption is the closure that was supposed to happen is when he's talking to Lloyd. So
Yes,
he talks to
you're
Lloyd,
right.
and he's having the conversation with Lloyd, and he offers him the drink. This is the medicine, and he's just like, nope, I'm not taking it. And so I could kind of see sort of a resolution. It just seemed like it was a weird, like, kind of subplot for me. I didn't hate it. It was just one of those things that I was like, this seems kind of strange to me. So I don't know. It was like a weird quirk for me when I was watching it.
Okay, all
Um,
right.
the only other thing, I have a couple other things, but Billy's death
Yes.
really bothered me.
Well, and I kind of had a sinking feeling about it anyway, because they don't really know what they're getting into or who they're
No.
fighting.
Yes.
Um, you just got the feeling that as soon as one of them gets away, the girl who's the most dangerous one got away from them
Yeah.
long enough
Yep.
to be able to use her
Yep.
gift.
Yep.
And so, I think the conversation that happens between Abra and Crow Daddy was a really interesting one and needed to happen, because with the stakes being that high, someone had to die on both sides.
Yeah.
And the thing that I told Annie, and she totally agreed with me, is as soon as Dan makes the decision that he's going to go to his home turf, that he's going to go back to the hotel,
Yeah.
as soon as he makes that choice, he's willing to accept his fate, and I think we
Yes.
both knew that he was not going to leave there alive at that point.
No. No, there was no way he was going to leave.
So it's just Billy Freeman, and this is a testament to, I think, how genuine Cliff Curtis played that character. it really hurts to see him gone, because he's gone just like that. There is not. They don't get a chance to say goodbye. It's over very, very quickly.
Oh yeah, and it hit me in the gut, and it's one of those things where my problem with it is that the character was so good and so effective that the loss of him so simply is what bothered me. I was just like, but I think that's the point. You know what I mean?
Right,
I think it's supposed to. It's like I'm not supposed to be okay with it. So it just really, really bothered me. And so when you're talking about deaths on both sides, you're right. It needed to happen. He had already had essentially her father is gone, and then you have him who's gone. But I also agree that I also had the sinking feeling the minute she got away. I was like, okay, somebody's gonna, Billy's probably gonna die, because she's probably the one that's one of the more dangerous ones of the group. Because a lot of the other ones you don't really see what their abilities are,
right?
But hers, and hers is a serious one. So
yeah, it's deadly serious to guys.
Yes,
men,
yep,
for sure.
Yep, for sure. The only other thing I have to say about my quirk, so we can get into yours, is I feel like this movie was, and this is just a minor one, is this movie for me was a little bit too long. I remember when I was watching it, I was just kind of like, man, this movie feels like, because The Shining is a pretty long movie also. And when I looked at the timing, this movie was actually longer than The Shining. And I thought there was a few scenes they could have cut out to kind of lower off some time. I felt like it was probably about 10 minutes too long. And I'm always concerned when I'm in the theater and I start seeing people looking at their watches. They're turning their phone on. I always get concerned when stuff like that happens, and there was definitely a time period where I was like, ooh, this is starting to kind of drag, and a lot of movies have this issue where it kind of lulls in the middle. The time periods where I thought was rough was the traveling, because they're driving by car through all of this, and so you get a lot of scenes with them traveling to locations that are really far away from each other. So with that said, you end up having those extra scenes in there that really makes the lull, I think, even worse in the middle. But it was just a minor problem that I wanted to mention.
Okay. And, timing is something, and what's weird to me is, and I don't want to say that I totally disagree with you there, but I really felt like, because of the amount of distance this movie covers, that I really felt like the pacing was good, and to the point where I didn't really notice the runtime. But now that you mention it, there were people having to get up and do bathroom breaks, and for me, when I start thinking about a movie going experience, I think that 2-hour threshold is a lot when you throw on top of it that there's usually 20 minutes of BS plus previews.
You have to deal with the previews.
It's gotten far worse than it ever has.
Oh yes, it has, for sure.
So especially when they're trying to get you to go back and get more concessions and everything, and then you you do a few commercials, the same M&M commercials over and over again. Coca-Cola has to have the last word.
Yep,
and then
Coca-Cola
you go into previews, and then usually something for the theater, and then you expect audiences to sit there for a 2.5-hour movie. That's just not really gonna, you better be moving stuff along, you know.
Oh yeah, you definitely should move stuff along, and it's just one of those time periods where, and I personally don't think the pacing was the problem because I didn't feel like the movie was slow. I just thought it was a little long runtime. I felt like there was stuff they could have cut out to kind of streamline it a little bit, but I definitely never felt like the pacing was that much of an issue because I feel like you always got as the story comes to be, you keep getting little nuggets of things that pushes the story along, and I think that's really important. And I think they actually did that well. So like I wasn't complaining about the pacing, but it was definitely just like the runtime just seemed a little long. And I definitely remember there being a lot of people taking bathroom breaks also in my movie.
Gotcha. Okay.
But that's all I got.
So so maybe help me out here with something. And I actually don't have very many quirks, so I'm glad that you didn't throw that at me right away. But Dick Halloran's return,
Yes.
as a character. So he's in The Shining briefly. He gives Danny some guidance, right?
Yes.
So am I to understand that he is definitely passed? Because I don't remember that, and so now he returns as a ghost, right?
Yeah,
he dies in The Shining, or
I haven't seen The Shining in a very long time, so
right.
I'm not 100% on that.
But I mean, he's definitely
sure.
a ghost in this movie. So
yes, he is.
He had the same gift that Danny did, but I guess this was one of the weird things. He was fully aware that these soul vampires, and I can't remember the name that they give themselves. There's a name
the True Knots or something like that.
Yeah,
the True Knot.
But I mean that's what they are. They're like soul sucking vampires.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yep.
It just is a little surprising to me that they're having this discussion when it's now Dan. He's fully grown, and he's closed himself off from The Shining. The fact that they're having this conversation now, and he never warned Danny about him sooner, you know.
Yeah.
And I get that things change, and I'll tell you, when you watch The Shining versus Doctor Sleep, for me it doesn't feel like a continuous story. You know, Doctor Sleep is a much larger version of that world.
Oh yeah.
Which I both.
Well, I mean, The Shining's completely done in the hotel. Yeah.
And it has a very different. Like this is definitely. It kind of feels like going from the Matrix to going to the Matrix sequels, where all of a sudden you have like a big movie feel. You know, like the universe has to grow and everything, which I both like what Stephen King introduced, and I also hate it at the same time, because I kind of wonder if it should have been maybe all ghosts, but you know the villains that he introduced for this one, they kind of toe that line anyway. You know, they're vampires, so it's still part of the supernatural.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering if it needed to be more about haunted places, but you know, that's just one of those little kind of nitpicky things where I both really like what he introduced, but then I look back on the original Shining like, well, does it actually, you know, it almost seems like a continuation written by a different author. And that could be because, like you mentioned, he did the sequel so much later.
Oh, it was decades later.
That he's a different writer. He's not the same writer anymore either.
No,
you know,
he's not.
And he had a lot of time to think about it. So the one big quirk that I had, which I talked with my wife about, and so she kind of got me to think about it a little differently, but Rose the Hat, like, what the hell was she thinking? Because this girl Abra is clearly more powerful than her.
Oh
And
yeah.
her friends and her little
Yep.
gypsy gang of soul-sucking vampires.
Yeah.
And from Rose's perspective, until the very last scene where she finally sees that Abra has help from Dan, her perspective has to be that this little girl has killed her entire clan.
Yes.
Because that's it. Like when they have that meeting, on the road there, and they're both staring down at each other, and the little girl just walks right through her.
Walks right through
That's
her.
that's absolutely one of my favorite scenes. But it got me thinking,
It's
like,
great.
what are you getting yourself into? Because this
Yeah.
little girl is so confident and so powerful at such a young age, but. And I get that, wow, they really need her. They need to probably find a way to feed off her for decades if possible because of how strong she is, and she's stronger than Danny. But it just kind of got me thinking, like, I'm amazed she went after her alone. If there are others, if she wasn't lying and there are more like her, I'm amazed that she went after her alone, and in fact went up against two psychics. She fought two psychics at the end of the movie. But I just it's one of those things, and it's her own pride and hubris at that point motivating her. She wants
that's exactly what it is.
She still wants the prize. It's just that part of it to me was amazing, and then it made me question a little bit, like, okay, is Abra, like, she's supposed to be a young teenage girl, but she's kind of playing a character who's far more mature than that. And for me, that came out as soon as this actress pretends to be Dan Torrance in that van scene, I was like, oh wow, she's they got a girl who was pretty talented, because there's a definite shift in the way that she's talking and acting and everything. But maybe that's where part of that swagger comes from anyway.
Which is true. And it's funny that you mentioned that scene, because that was it's funny, a lot of my favorite scenes in this movies are with her.
The little girl.
Like you're talking to the little girl.
Yeah.
So like her talking to Rose was one of my favorite scenes, and the scene in the car where she's like acting like Dan. I was like, I like this.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it.
Especially I've got one more trick. You want to see it?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it for me as far as quirks go, and it was really just the one big thing about Rose. The hat,
it seems like for the most part our quirks are very minor.
Which is it's so funny to me when we get a movie like this, a thriller, something that you just think would be chocked full of them, and then there's just not that much.
Nope, it's actually just kind of really well done, and I think I don't know what's happening in recent years, but I feel like this genre has improved. I feel like people have started stepping up their game with the level of like horror and thriller and suspense. And I think this one's another one where they're just like, man, they're doing a better job here. Because it's a genre that you and I both aren't crazy fond of. But the problem isn't the genre as a whole. The problem is that the lack of creativity in it.
Right, and so now we're getting more talented directors and storytellers who...
Yep. And it's turning into this genre that I'm like, okay, so now I'm starting to really like some of these movies. Even when I was watching some of the trailers of the other horror movies that are coming out in the next year or so, I'm like, I might give it a shot, which is not what I would have thought of 5 years ago. I just was like, I'm not even going to bother watching it, because it's like a horror movie. It's probably going to be a bunch of jump scares. Don't care. Like that's kind of the attitude that a lot of people
I
have.
hate those, and there were a couple in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, it's a part of the genre. I doubt if you're going to completely get rid of them.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can get into the likes then. So, I mean, I have to mention performances first. Rebecca Ferguson as Rose, I just love it. She's like such a good character, and I think Rebecca Ferguson as her is so good. I love her attitude about it. It's so nice to see her really just be a villain and just kind of be this antagonist that is powerful and like confident. And I like some of the other scenes that I really enjoyed with Rose was her interactions with Abra are so good, even when they're trying to fight each other in their minds, you know, where she's like astral projecting herself. And you have this really cool scene, which is another one of my likes, of when they do this like vision or this astral projection where like everything turns on its side, which is just like really cool.
Yeah.
To have in there. And when you have that happen and she's like floating through the earth or above the sky and everything, and then she like finds her, and then they have this interaction with each other, I just like thought it was just so good. And even when she's trying to like convince people to join up is also just such a great, she just has a subtleness about her that's just really good and kind of creepy at the same time, and just kind of scary yet really confident. And it's really loved her performance. And along with that, like we said earlier, Kyliegh Curran's performance also as Abra is just great. We already talked about all the scenes with her that I love, and it's just great. It's really good. The only other thing I have to say is the ending to the second act I thoroughly enjoyed. And I don't know if some people would hate this, but man, I enjoyed that there's just a gunfight in the middle of this movie. it's this movie has it's a slow burn, you know, and it has this, and we were talking about this, how the pacing I think is good, and it runs. I think the run length's a little long, but you're getting these nuggets of story that moves the story on, like I was saying earlier. And then you have this culmination of essentially the True Knot group. You have that story complete itself at the second act. So it's almost like there's like this extra story in the middle of the movie. So you have essentially like almost like a detective type story. Like she figures out who the kid is, and then she finds out who they are, and then it culminates in this gunfight. And that's like this extra little sub movie, because that itself could be an entire movie, you know?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and I just thought it was so cool. You had this extra little movie, and then you had the overall plot kind of complete itself in the third act. And I thought that was just like such a cool thing. I feel like I don't see that very often in movies. And just what is a gunfight not entertaining? So it was just like one of the more entertaining scenes, other than the extra, like, kind of like humorous scenes. It's not a funny movie, but there's definitely scenes in there, kind of like when the father finally figures out when Abra blast him with the psychic powers, and then the next scene he's just like shaking,
right,
pouring
alcohol,
pouring alcohol, and then he takes a drink, and I love how you get another shot. You know, you usually don't get the other shot of them shaking, but you got one more shot to realize, no, he's messed up right now. That was great. But there's a lot of little scenes like that where it's just a simple scene where the seriousness is definitely evident, but like you have this extra little thing to kind of break tension just a little bit of tension, and that happens a lot in this movie, and I love it. But that's all I had, man.
All right. So I love a lot of the little character performances. I think it's a really creative idea, even though I was kind of complaining about it earlier, that maybe it doesn't really feel like The Shining.
Yeah,
And it's more of a thriller than
it
anything.
is.
I wouldn't call it a horror film, because the more you see the True Knot characters, I think the less scary they are, and that's the
Yeah,
case with in any case. The more you see Jason, right, the more you see Freddy
yeah,
Krueger or whatever, in those really prototypical slasher films, the less scary they appear to be. But I mean, they're
yeah.
genuinely terrifying at the beginning, even though I hate seeing little kids tortured.
Oh my
And
God, that scene was hard.
yeah, that was a really, really tough scene.
Yeah, it was.
And, so there's something so satisfying about seeing them all get gunned down.
Yep. Yep.
Which almost seems like it's such a haphazard plan, but it works in their favor because none of them know that she has help.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
so, I mean, there's a lot of things I liked, and I liked something that is probably the most controversial thing, and I think my wife disagreed with me on this, but when they bring back Lloyd the bartender,
Yeah.
and it's actually his father, and this
Yep.
is where the Hill House connection comes in. They got Henry Thomas to step in as for that role,
Yeah.
and I thought that was really cool because we knew that Mike Flanagan had done Haunting on Hill House
Yes.
and had worked with Henry Thomas, and this was the first time when I watched that on Netflix, I was like, oh wow, it's so weird to think that this is the same boy in E.T. Like he's now stepped beyond that shadow. That was a really big shadow, and now he's doing other things that he's known for, and he's almost unrecognizable in this film. So we had a disagreement. Annie thought they should have CGI'd Jack Nicholson, and I think that would have been the wrong move. I think that would have been way too distracting for what the scene needed.
I think so too.
So
I think it would have been.
I loved his performance because he looked just like the attitude is there. It's tonally the right thing, but it's different enough, I think, to where you get that he's somewhere in between. His father's still stuck there at the hotel.
And I think the other importance of, and I think the director was aware of this because the way that scene is filmed is he's pretty much in profile the entire time. So he kind of blends in, you know what I mean? Like it kind of looks like Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
But it's not, and I think it's filmed that way on purpose, not only to kind of blur these characters together, but also it creates tension because it's like this almost perfect profile shot, and then you have the extra tension of having two characters confront each other. So it's almost like looking at it from like a fighting game perspective. You're like looking dead profile, and they're both kind of like talking to each other back and forth, and you keep getting shots of them talking, and it's just the glass and stuff like that. And I love that scene too, how it's filmed.
And I kept hoping that that Dan was going to use his boxes and use the spirits that he had captured. And boy, does that pay off. I think it pays off in just an amazing scene. So, I think a lot of the car driving, the journey to get there where, you probably feel like, hey, we have to show them stopping for gas and having a discussion in the car and everything. But I think the fact that, he had this mental prison, and that he was able to pass that on at the end of the movie to Abra, for me, I felt like everything came full circle. Everything they set up throughout the course of the movie gets paid off.
Yes.
at the end, and so
It does.
that's a very rare thing to see. And there's a lot of things that I like that I'm probably not even remembering.
Oh,
But,
I'm sure there is. I know I have some that I don't remember because I really enjoyed the film. I thought they did a good job.
So, alright, I think that's it for me, and we can rate this thing.
Alright, so I think this is definitely, I get where you're coming from, where you're saying it's doesn't feel like a sequel. It feels like a different, it's just a much larger universe in this one. But I think it's really good, and I definitely am gonna say see it. I can't believe I'm saying see it to a movie like this, but I loved it. I thought it was really good.
I'm definitely gonna say see it. In fact, I would even go as far as to say see it, buy it. But I think you gotta be a real, like, I thought this was very well done, and these aren't the kind of movies that I enjoy going to see. But when I feel that it's really well done and it's actually watchable to go and see it a second time. For me, that's rare to say about, thriller or something that's on the cusp of being in the horror genre.
Suspense. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's definitely go and see it for sure.
Yeah, that's a good movie. I've enjoyed it. Alright, so let's go ahead and sign out, Jones. So, if anybody wants to contact us, you can always see us or contact us at the home of the web on halfpastpodcast.com.
Yeah, don't show up at Graham's house.
Yeah,
please.
Don't show up there.
Like us on Facebook.
And we're on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify.
We're on Stitcher, Libsyn, and TuneIn. I love my Stitcher app.
You and that Stitcher app, man. I hate that you love it so much. I wish they were a sponsor. You can always contact us at halfpastcast@gmail.com. That's halfpastcast@gmail.com. Just email us there and give us a ring or whatever.
Yeah, a ring, huh? Tweet us at halfpastpodcast.
Oh, you like all my really weird outro here? I thank everybody for listening, and thanks everybody for their support. We've had a fun time doing this podcast. It's been really fun, and I was surprised at this movie. And it's kind of funny because we weren't originally planning on doing this one.
That's the other thing too, which we didn't even talk about. So we are gonna still do Terminator. I know Annie wants to see it.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna still do Terminator Dark Fate. But this one ends up being kind of a bonus episode. It kind of popped up, and we decided to just do it. And so here's another one, and that's all there is to it, man. So I guess we're going to get out of here. So I'm Graham Ricks.
All right. Jonesy. Long pause. What am I going to sign out with? I'll just make something up.
We've done almost 90 episodes. What the heck's the matter with you?
You can't just drop in the perfect one.
I want you to say it every single time.
Oh boy. Awesome.
See you next flick.
Oh.